My mom and dad gave all their cash to my brother after selling their apartment. Then they came to my territory, so I had to call security to kick them out. Now they're on their knees begging for my forgiveness. Hey Reddit, my name is Tyler, and I'm 33 years old. What I'm about to share happened about 4 months ago, but I'm still dealing with the fallout from my family about it. I figured I'd share the whole mess here because, honestly, I need to vent and get some outside perspective on whether I'm being unreasonable or if my family is just completely insane. I've been married to my wife Victoria for 6 years now. She's an architect, incredibly smart, and makes good money. As for me, I run a custom woodworking business that I built from absolutely nothing. We're doing well for ourselves. We own 2 houses. The one we live in is nice. Nothing crazy expensive, but comfortable and exactly what we need. The second house I bought as an investment property about 3 years ago. It's a smaller place, and I rent it out to this young couple, Chris and Lisa. They're honestly perfect tenants. They pay their rent on time every month, never cause any problems, and take great care of the place. I couldn't ask for better renters. Now here's where my family comes into this story, and where everything starts to go sideways. My parents had 2 kids, me and my younger brother Brandon. Brandon is 30 years old, and I swear to God, this guy has never worked a real job in his entire adult life. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. Since graduating from college, which my parents paid for, obviously, Brandon has been bouncing between these ridiculous business ventures that he calls entrepreneurship. All of them always end up costing my parents money when they inevitably fail. Meanwhile, when I wanted to start my woodworking business, did I get any family financial support? Hell no. My dad actually told me it was too risky and said I should focus on getting a stable job with benefits instead. But when Brandon announced he was an entrepreneur, suddenly it was all about supporting his vision and believing in his potential. The double standard was incredible, but I'd learned to live with it over the years. Fast forward to the present situation. Brandon is engaged to this woman named Crystal, who has what I can only describe as extremely expensive taste and zero understanding of where money actually comes from. This girl is always wearing brand new clothes, always traveling somewhere exotic, and constantly talking about their luxury lifestyle on social media. On what income, you might ask? That's a great question, because as far as I can tell, Brandon is currently between ventures again, which means he's living off my parents' generosity while he explores new opportunities. Crystal doesn't work either because she's apparently focusing on wedding planning and building her brand. Her brand consists of posting selfies and makeup tutorials to her whopping 900 Instagram followers. Here's where things went completely downhill. About 4 months ago, my parents called me up, and they were absolutely excited about something. They told me they had decided to sell the family house. This is the house they've owned for 30 years, the one they bought when my dad first got his job at the power company. It's a nice place in a good neighborhood, probably worth around $480,000 in today's market. I figured they were finally ready to downsize, you know? Maybe move to one of those 55-plus communities or get something easier to maintain now that they're in their late 60s. It made complete sense to me, and I was actually happy for them. They'd worked hard their whole lives and deserved to enjoy their retirement. So I'm on the phone with my mom, and she's going on and on about how they got such a good price for the house, how excited they are about this new chapter in their lives. I'm genuinely happy for them. They deserve to enjoy their golden years after all the work they put in. Then she drops the bombshell on me that I never saw coming. "We gave all the money to Brandon for his wedding gift," she said, as casually as if she was telling me about the weather. I'm sitting there thinking I must have misheard her. "You gave him what now?" I asked, hoping I'd somehow gotten confused. "All of it, the full $480,000. He found this beautiful high-rise apartment uptown, and we wanted to help him start his new life with Crystal properly." I'm doing math in my head at this point. If the high-rise cost more than $480,000 and they gave him everything from the house sale, where exactly did my parents plan to live? It didn't make any sense. Turns out Brandon had found this $1.3 million high-rise in the trendy part of Uptown, one of those glass tower places with a concierge, valet parking, and all the luxury amenities you could imagine. My parents had given him their entire life savings as a down payment, and he was supposedly going to finance the rest. On what income? Still a great question that nobody seemed to be asking. "What about your retirement?" I asked my mom, genuinely concerned about their financial security. "Oh, we have it all figured out," she said cheerfully, like she was discussing weekend plans. And that's when she hit me with the second bombshell. "We're moving into your rental house." Just like that. Not, "Would you consider," Or could we talk about? Or even, do you think that might be possible? Just a straight-up announcement that they were taking over my investment property. I was speechless. I asked if they'd discussed this with my tenants, Chris and Lisa. Apparently, that wasn't necessary because I could just tell them to leave. You know, break a legal lease and screw over two people who'd never done anything wrong. Just because my parents needed somewhere to live after giving away their house money to fund my brother's luxury lifestyle. The entitlement was absolutely breathtaking. They'd made this massive financial decision without consulting anyone, given away their security to fund my brother's expensive tastes, and then just assumed I'd solve their housing problem by destroying my rental income and legal obligations to good tenants. When I told them that wasn't happening, my dad's voice got real cold, real fast. "We raised you, Tyler. This is what family does for each other," he said with that tone that used to make me feel guilty as a kid. Right, family. The same family that paid for Brandon's college, but not mine. The same family that funded his failed business ventures while telling me to be more realistic about my goals. The same family that just handed him $500,000 while expecting me to provide free housing and destroy my business relationships in the process. I told them I'd call them back and hung up the phone. Victoria was standing in the kitchen doorway. She'd heard enough of the conversation to know exactly what was happening. "Please tell me you're not actually considering this," she said, looking at me with concern. "Not for a second," I replied. But I knew this was just the beginning. My parents don't take no for an answer, especially when they think they're entitled to something. And they clearly thought they were entitled to my rental property. I had no idea how ugly this was about to get. I was at the workshop last Wednesday when my phone started blowing up. Chris was calling and I almost didn't answer because I was trying to concentrate on a detailed piece I was working on. But something made me pick up the phone. "Tyler, we need help," Chris said, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "There are people at our front door claiming they own this house." My stomach dropped immediately. "What do you mean claiming they own it?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling about where this was going. "They have suitcases and they're banging on the door, telling us we need to pack up and leave. The woman is screaming that this is their house now and we're trespassing." I already knew who it was, but I asked anyway. "Did they give you names?" "They said they're your parents." Of course they did. I told Chris not to open the door under any circumstances and that I was on my way. I dropped everything, didn't even turn off the Sanders, just grabbed my keys and rushed out to drive across town. The drive over there was surreal. I kept thinking maybe there was some misunderstanding, maybe they were just confused about something. But deep down, I knew exactly what was happening. My parents had decided that since I wouldn't voluntarily hand over my rental property, they'd just take it by force. I pulled up to the house and sure enough, there's my mom and dad on the front porch with 2 big suitcases and a bunch of shopping bags. My mom was pounding on the door with her fist while my dad stood there looking all authoritative, like he was the landlord showing up to collect rent. "This is ridiculous," my mom was yelling. "We know you're in there. Open this door right now." I could see Chris and Lisa's curtains twitching. They were probably scared out of their minds, but they were smart enough not to answer the door. My parents saw me coming up the walkway, and my mom immediately switched from angry to relieved, like I was there to save the day for them. "Tyler, thank goodness you're here," she said, putting on this overly sweet voice. "These people won't leave." "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We're moving in. We told you we needed somewhere to live." And I told you that wasn't happening. My dad stepped forward with that stern expression he used to give me when I was a kid, and had done something wrong. "Son, we've been staying at the extended stay motel for 2 weeks, waiting for you to handle this situation. 2 weeks in a hotel instead of, I don't know, looking for an apartment or calling a realtor or doing literally anything that responsible adults do when they need housing. You've been staying at a hotel because you chose to sell your house and give the money away," I said. "That's not my problem to solve. We're your parents, and they're just tenants with a legal lease," my mom shot back, as if that somehow made it okay to break the law. That's when my mom completely lost it. She started screaming about how ungrateful I was, how they had sacrificed everything for their children, and how a good son would take care of his parents. The whole neighborhood could hear her carrying on. My dad tried a different approach, going for the guilt trip angle. "Look, we already gave our notice at the hotel. Our checkout is today. We have nowhere else to go." Notice how that was supposed to be my emergency? They'd painted themselves into a corner through their own poor decisions and expected me to solve it by screwing over 2 innocent people who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Chris cracked the door open just enough to stick his head out. "Is everything okay? Should we call someone?" he asked nervously. Everything's fine, I told him. My parents are leaving. We are not leaving, my mom shrieked. This is family property. That's when I lost my patience completely. This is my property. I bought it with my money from my business that I built with zero help from either of you. My dad started in with the guilt trip routine. After everything we did for you, what exactly did you do for me, Dad? Because I'm having trouble remembering all this help you're talking about. He got flustered and started stammering about raising me and providing for me. I cut him off before he could get going. You provided the legal minimum required to not get arrested for child neglect. Meanwhile, you're currently funding Brandon's high-rise lifestyle while demanding I give you free housing. My mom was crying now, doing that thing where she makes herself the victim in every situation. Where are we supposed to go? She wailed. Literally anywhere that isn't my rental property, I replied. The whole thing was absolutely insane. They'd created this problem themselves, ignored every reasonable solution, and were now trying to force me to fix it by destroying my business relationship with good tenants. Chris spoke up again from behind the slightly cracked door. Should I call the police? My parents both whipped around to stare at him like he'd suggested calling in an airstrike. You wouldn't dare involve the police in a family matter, my dad said with indignation. He absolutely would, I replied firmly. And so would I. You're trespassing. That's when it got really ugly. My mom started screaming about how I was choosing strangers over family, how she was ashamed to have raised such a selfish son, and how my dead grandmother would be rolling in her grave if she could see what kind of person I'd become. My dad went straight for the throat with his next attack. Your brother would never treat us like this. You're right, I said calmly. My brother would take your money and let you live in your car. At least I'm being honest about saying no. I turned to Chris, who was still watching this whole disaster unfold from his doorway. If they're not off this property in 5 minutes, call 911. This isn't over, my dad said as he grabbed one of the suitcases with obvious anger. They loaded their stuff back into their car, with my mom crying the whole time about what a horrible son I was and how family was supposed to stick together. The last thing I heard before they drove off was my dad yelling that I'd regret this decision. After they left, I apologized profusely to Chris and Lisa for all the drama they'd just witnessed. It turns out they'd been hiding in their bedroom for 20 minutes before I showed up, genuinely scared that these crazy people were going to break down the door and force their way inside. I gave them my direct cell number and told them to call me immediately if my parents showed up again. I also told them I'd completely understand if they wanted to break their lease early after this harassment, though I really hoped they'd stay since they were such great tenants. But I knew my parents weren't done with this. People who think they're entitled to your property don't just give up because you said no once. They escalate, and I just didn't realize how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. The next day, my phone started ringing constantly. And I mean constantly, like every hour on the hour. Different numbers, different relatives, all with the same basic message. I'm a terrible son who's abandoning his parents in their time of need. The first call was from my Aunt Susan at 7:30 in the morning. I'm barely awake. The coffee hasn't even finished brewing, and she's laying into me about family values and respect for elders. Apparently, my parents had called her crying about how their ungrateful son had left them homeless. Tyler, how could you do this to them? They're your parents, she said, her voice full of disappointment. I tried explaining the situation, but she cut me off immediately. I don't want to hear excuses. You need to figure out a way to help them. Then she hung up on me. An hour later, my cousin Noah called. I haven't talked to this guy in probably 3 years, but suddenly he's very concerned about my character and moral compass. He had the same script as my aunt. How could I abandon family? What kind of person chooses money over parents? Blah, blah, blah. They raised you, man. You owe them, he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. They raised my brother too, and he's the one with their money, I pointed out. That's different, Noah replied without missing a beat. How is it different? I asked, genuinely curious about the mental gymnastics he was doing. Click, another hang-up. This pattern continued all day long. By noon, I'd gotten 8 phone calls and probably 15 text messages. The texts were honestly the worst part. Long guilt trips about family loyalty, how my parents had sacrificed everything for their kids, how I was breaking their hearts by being so selfish. My phone kept buzzing every few minutes with another message from another relative who'd apparently been recruited for this harassment campaign. Here's what really got me, though. Not one of these people asked for my side of the story. Not one of them said, hey, what's actually happening here? They all just accepted my parents' version of events and decided I was the villain. My cousin Phoebe sent me this long Facebook message about how my parents were living like refugees in a hotel, and how could I sleep at night knowing they were suffering? Living like refugees because they chose to sell their house and give the money away. But apparently that detail wasn't important to the family narrative. I'm reading this stuff thinking, where were all these traditional family values when my parents were funding Brandon's lifestyle for the past 15 years? Where was the family concern when I was working 3 jobs to pay for college because they wouldn't help me, but had plenty of money for my brother's education? But here's the thing that really pissed me off. Not one of these righteous family members offered to help my parents themselves. They all had very strong opinions about what I should do, but somehow none of them had spare bedrooms or guest houses available. When I pointed this out to my Aunt Susan during her second call of the day, she got all flustered. "Well, we don't have the space," she stammered. "You have a 4-bedroom house and it's just you and Uncle Mike," I replied. "I don't have space either. That's why I rent it to people," I told her. "You have more money," she said, and there it was, the real reason. Because I had busted my back and built a successful business, I was obligated to solve everyone else's problems. Because I'd been responsible with my finances, I should subsidize everyone else's bad decisions. The logic was absolutely infuriating. By Thursday, I'd had enough of this harassment campaign. I sat down that night and wrote the most comprehensive email of my life. It took me about 2 hours to get it exactly right because I wanted to be clear, factual, and impossible to misinterpret. The subject line was "Setting the Record Straight, the Full Story." I started with a clear timeline of events. Parents sell house for $480,000. Parents give all money to Brandon for high-rise down payment. Parents announce they're moving into my rental property without asking. I say no and offer to help them find appropriate housing. They refuse and demand I evict my legal tenants. Then I attached documentation, screenshots of text messages, photos of the lease agreement. Even pulled up property records showing when I bought the house and how much I paid. I wanted everyone to see exactly what they were asking me to do and what the real situation was. The email was probably 2,000 words long, and I went through everything point by point. I explained how my parents had made this decision without consulting anyone, how they'd given away their financial security, and how they expected me to solve their problem by breaking legal contracts with good tenants. But the best part was the end. I listed every single person who had called or texted me about family duty and obligation over the past few days. Then I wrote, "Since everyone is so concerned about my parents' housing situation, I'm sure one of you will be happy to provide them with a place to stay. After all, family helps family, right? Please let me know your move-in date for mom and dad so I can give them your address." I hit send at 11:30 p.m. on Thursday night to about 30 people. Every relative who'd contacted me, plus a few others who I knew would hear about it anyway. My phone was completely silent Friday morning. For the first time in 3 days, I wasn't woken up by angry relatives telling me what a terrible person I was. Around noon, I started getting responses, and they fell into 3 distinct categories. First, there were people who suddenly remembered they didn't really have space after all. Lots of messages about how they'd love to help, but their guest room was being used for storage, or they had renovations going on, or their HOA didn't allow long-term guests. Second, there were people who went radio silent completely, just stopped responding to anything related to the situation. Third, there were people who doubled down and got even nastier than before. Uncle Bob was in this category. He sent me this long, dramatic reply about how I was destroying the family and turning my back on the people who made me who I am. Really over-the-top stuff about dishonoring my ancestors and breaking the bonds of blood. I replied to Uncle Bob with one sentence. "What's your move-in date?" He never responded. The family Facebook group went completely silent after that. All those posts about duty and respect just disappeared. Funny how that works. When people are asked to put their money where their mouth is, suddenly they don't have much to say. By Saturday, the phone calls had stopped entirely. Either people realized they'd been fed a load of bullshit, or they figured out I wasn't backing down. Either way, the harassment campaign ended as quickly as it had started. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more call to make. I called Brandon directly on Saturday afternoon, and he picked up on the first ring, like he'd been waiting for it. "Tyler, what the hell did you send to everyone?" he said immediately. No greeting or small talk. "The truth. You got a problem with that?" I replied. "You're making the whole family look bad," he complained. We went back and forth for about 10 minutes. He tried every angle he could think of, how mom and dad needed help, how I was being selfish, how family should stick together. all the same garbage I'd been hearing all week from everyone else. Finally, I cut to the point. "You've got their money, Brandon. You figure out their housing." Then I hung up and waited to see what would happen next. I didn't have to wait long. The first sign something was wrong came from my cousin Maria. She's basically the only family member who stayed neutral during the whole mess, probably because she's got her own problems to deal with and doesn't have time for drama. She texted me one random Thursday afternoon. "Hey, did you know Brandon is having problems with his high-rise purchase?" I hadn't heard anything, but it didn't surprise me. Financing a $1.3 million place when you've never had a steady job tends to be complicated, to put it mildly. "What kind of problems?" I texted back. "Bank is asking for employment verification and income statements." Apparently, that's harder to provide than he thought. No shit, Sherlock. Turns out banks actually want to see proof you can pay back massive loans. What a revolutionary concept. Maria didn't have all the details, but over the next few weeks, the story started coming together through the family grapevine. The bank had initially pre-approved Brandon based on my parents' down payment and some projections about his consulting business. But when it came time for final approval, they wanted actual documentation, pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements. All that boring paperwork that proves you're not just some deadbeat looking to live beyond your means. Problem is, Brandon didn't have any of that stuff because he doesn't actually make any money. His consulting business was basically him calling himself an entrepreneur and occasionally meeting people for coffee to discuss opportunities. No clients, no contracts, no revenue, just a website he'd paid someone to build and some business cards. The bank laughed him out of the office. Without the loan, he couldn't buy the high-rise. Without buying the high-rise, he couldn't get his deposit back. And that deposit? It was a big chunk of my parents' house money. But wait, it gets better. See, Brandon and Crystal had been planning this massive wedding. We're talking 200 plus guests, fancy venue, open bar, the whole production. Because when you're living off your parents' retirement fund, why not go all out, right? The wedding venue wanted final payment 2 weeks before the ceremony. Brandon called my parents asking them to cover it, since they'd already invested so much in his future. My parents had to explain that they'd given him literally everything and were currently living in a one-bedroom apartment they could barely afford. So Brandon started reaching out to family members for loans. And I put that in quotes because we all knew he wasn't planning to pay anyone back. "Hey, I'm just short on the wedding venue payment," he'd say to relatives. "Could you help me out? It's just temporary until my business picks up." I got a text from him too. "Tyler, I know we've had our differences, but I could really use your help with the venue payment. It's only $18,000. Only $18,000, like that's pocket change you find in your couch cushions. I didn't even bother replying to that nonsense. Apparently, nobody else did either, because the venue ended up canceling their booking 3 days before the wedding. They just straight up told Brandon and Crystal that the room wasn't available anymore because payment hadn't been received. They ended up having the ceremony in Crystal's backyard. Half the guests didn't show up because of the last-minute venue change, and the other half spent the whole time whispering about what a disaster it was. According to Maria, Crystal cried through most of the reception about how this wasn't how she'd imagined her special day would go. Meanwhile, the same week as their backyard wedding disaster, I closed on my third property. I'd been looking at this place for months, a small commercial building that needed some work but had great potential. The previous owner was motivated to sell, and I got it for about $45,000 under market value. My plan is to renovate it and either flip it or rent it out for commercial space, depending on what makes more sense financially. I posted a casual photo on Instagram of the keys and paperwork with the caption, "Another project in the works. Sometimes patience pays off." Nothing dramatic, just a normal business update. A few family members liked the post, though I noticed my parents didn't. But the story wasn't over yet. My parents were about to make one last desperate play. Last Sunday morning, I'm having coffee with Victoria in our kitchen, talking about baby names and looking at paint samples for the nursery walls. It was a nice, peaceful morning. Exactly the kind of quiet family time I'd been looking forward to more of. Then our Ring doorbell starts going off. I look at my phone and see my parents standing on our front porch, both of them dressed up nice. My mom is holding a bouquet of flowers and what looks like a grocery bag, while my dad's got this weird, forced smile, like he's trying to sell me something. They're talking directly to the camera like it's a video call. "Tyler, we know you're home," my mom says in this overly sweet voice. "We can see your car in the driveway." I look at Victoria, and she's already shaking her head. "We brought groceries to cook for you," my dad chimes in, holding up the bag. Your mother wants to make that beef stew you used to love. The manipulation was incredible. They'd shown up uninvited to my house with props designed to make me feel guilty. Flowers and food like this was some normal family visit instead of another attempt to bulldoze my boundaries. We've been thinking about everything that happened, my mom continues to the camera. We made mistakes. We should have asked your permission about the rental house too. A little too late for that revelation. About 8 months too late, actually. I'm watching this whole performance on my phone while sitting 20 feet away from them. The audacity was absolutely breathtaking. After months of harassment, manipulation, and trying to destroy my business relationships, they thought they could just show up with flowers and reset everything like nothing had happened. Victoria looked at me with an expression that clearly said, "Please tell me you're not falling for this." "I'm not answering the door," I told her firmly. But my parents weren't giving up that easily. They stood there for about 10 minutes, taking turns talking to the camera and explaining how sorry they were and how much they missed me. My mom even started crying at one point, doing that whole victim routine she's perfected over the years. When it became obvious that I wasn't coming to the door, my dad's tone changed completely. "Tyler, this is ridiculous. We're your parents. Open the door so we can talk like adults." That's when I made my decision. I called the police non-emergency line. "I need to report trespassing," I told the dispatcher. "I have individuals on my property who refuse to leave, and I have a previous incident report involving the same people." The dispatcher was super professional about it. She asked if I felt threatened, if they were trying to break in, all the standard questions. I explained that they were my parents, but that I'd specifically asked them not to come to my house, and they'd already harassed my tenants at another property. "We'll send an officer out," she said. The response time was actually pretty quick. About 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. I watched through the window as this young cop got out and walked up to my parents. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see my dad getting animated, pointing at the house, probably explaining how this was just a family misunderstanding. My mom was still holding those damn flowers like they were evidence of her good intentions. The cop listened patiently, then walked over to the Ring doorbell and pressed the button. "Sir, this is Officer Martinez with the police department. Could you come to the door, please?" I went outside and explained the situation. The previous harassment of my tenants, the repeated demands for my property, months of family pressure, and manipulation. I showed him the incident report number from the rental house situation. Officer Martinez was completely reasonable about everything. "Do you want them to leave your property?" he asked. "Yes." "Have you asked them to leave and not return?" "Multiple times." He walked back over to my parents and had another conversation. This time I could hear my dad getting louder. "This is our son's house! We have a right to visit our own child!" "Sir, your son has asked you to leave his property. You need to respect that," Officer Martinez replied calmly. "This is ridiculous! We're family!" "I understand this is a family situation, but property rights still apply. You need to leave now." My mom started crying again, but the cop wasn't having it. He was polite but firm. They needed to pack up their flowers and groceries and get off my property immediately, and then they left. Officer Martinez came back to talk to me after they drove off. He suggested I document everything and consider filing for a restraining order if they continue to show up uninvited. "Sometimes people need official paperwork to understand that no means no," he explained. Tuesday morning, I called my lawyer and explained the whole timeline of events. "You've got grounds for a restraining order," he said, "especially with the previous incident involving your tenants." We filed the paperwork that afternoon. I attached everything I'd been documenting over the past 8 months: text messages, photos, incident reports, the whole paper trail. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. I half expected my parents to fight it, but they didn't even show up to court. The judge granted the restraining order without any drama. 200 yards, they can't come within 200 yards of my house, my business, or my rental property. Violation means automatic arrest. I also changed my phone number that week and only gave the new number to people I actually trust. The peace and quiet has been incredible. No more manipulation calls, no more guilt trips, no more surprise visits. Just me, my pregnant wife, and our normal life. 3 weeks. That's how long the calm lasted before the next fire started. I'm at the workshop when my phone rings. It's an unknown number, but it's local, so I pick up thinking it might be a potential client. "Hi, is this Tyler?" the voice asks. "Yes, this is Tyler. I'm calling about the investment opportunity your brother pitched me last month." I stop sanding immediately. "I'm sorry, what investment opportunity?" "The rental property portfolio. Brandon said you guys were partners in a real estate business and you were looking for private investors. My blood goes cold. Can you hold on just a second? I step outside the workshop and find somewhere quiet. Sir, I need you to tell me exactly what my brother told you. It turns out this guy Kevin had met Brandon at some networking event downtown. Brandon had introduced himself as co-owner of a successful property management company and started showing Kevin photos on his phone of their portfolio. The photos were of my houses, my rental property, my personal residence, even the commercial building I just bought. Brandon had been walking around town claiming he owned half my business. He said you guys had 3 properties currently generating income and were looking to expand, Kevin continued. He asked if I'd be interested in investing $28,000 for a stake in the next acquisition. $28,000. This wasn't some small-time scam, this was serious fraud. Did you give him any money? I asked, dreading the answer. I gave him $5,500 as a good faith deposit while I thought about the full investment. He said it would hold my spot in the deal. I felt sick to my stomach. Kevin, I need to tell you something. I don't have a business partner. I own those properties myself, and my brother has never invested a dime in anything I do. There was a long silence on the other end. Are you saying he scammed me? That's exactly what I'm saying, and you're probably not the only one. I got Kevin's contact information and told him I'd call him back. Then I did something I probably should have done months ago. I Googled my brother's name along with my business name. The results made me want to punch a wall. There were business networking profiles where Brandon listed himself as co-founder of my company. A LinkedIn page claiming he was partner and investment coordinator for my real estate business. Even a Facebook business page he'd created using my company name, with himself listed as the primary contact. This piece of shit had been impersonating me for months. I started making calls. First to my lawyer, then back to Kevin to get more details about exactly what Brandon had told him and what documentation he might have. Kevin sent me screenshots of their text conversations, and Brandon had even sent him a fake contract with letterhead that looked suspiciously similar to my actual business documents. But the worst part? He'd been using my reputation to legitimize his scams. He was telling people they could verify the success of the business by driving by the properties or looking up the ownership records, because the properties were real. They were just mine, not his. My lawyer's advice was simple. Document everything and call the police. This is identity theft and fraud, not family drama. That night I sat down with Victoria and showed her everything I'd found. This is beyond family now, I told her. He's literally stealing my identity to con people out of money. Friday morning I called the police and filed a fraud report. I brought all the documentation. Kevin's screenshots, the fake business profiles, everything. The detective assigned to the case was actually pretty interested once he saw the scope of what Brandon had been doing. We see a lot of family financial disputes, Detective Rodriguez told me, but this goes way beyond that. Your brother's been running an active con using your identity and assets. They opened an investigation immediately, but I wasn't done yet. I had a better idea. I called Kevin back and proposed something. What if we set up a meeting with Brandon? Let him think you're ready to make the full investment, and I'll show up as a surprise. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. Kevin texted Brandon saying he was ready to move forward with the $28,000 investment and wanted to finalize the paperwork. Brandon agreed immediately, probably because he was desperate for money. I showed up early and sat at a corner table where I could see everything but wouldn't be immediately visible to Brandon when he walked in. Brandon arrived right on time, carrying a folder that probably contained more fake documents. Kevin played it perfectly. So tell me more about how the partnership works with your brother, Kevin said. Oh, Tyler handles the day-to-day property management, but I'm the one who handles investor relations and new acquisitions, Brandon said smoothly. We've got a great system worked out. And he's okay with bringing in outside investors? Are you kidding? It was his idea. He's always saying we need more capital to expand faster. I almost laughed out loud. This guy was doubling down on the lies even when he was about to get caught. Actually, Kevin said, I'd love to meet Tyler and hear his perspective directly. Brandon got a little nervous. He's pretty busy with the properties, but maybe we can arrange something down the road. How about right now? That's when I stood up and walked over to their table. The look on Brandon's face was priceless, pure panic, like he'd just seen a ghost. His mouth actually fell open. Hey, partner, I said, sitting down next to Kevin. Kevin here was just telling me about this investment opportunity you've been discussing. Brandon started stammering. Tyler, I can explain. Please do, I said calmly. I'm really curious to hear about our business partnership that I somehow forgot about. Kevin was recording the whole thing on his phone. We'd agreed beforehand that he'd document everything for the police report. I thought maybe we could. Brandon couldn't even form complete sentences at this point. You thought you could steal my identity and defraud people using my properties as collateral? I said, maintaining my calm tone. Is that what you thought? The coffee shop was pretty quiet, but our conversation was starting to draw attention from other customers. Brandon looked around nervously, probably realizing how completely screwed he was. Kevin, I continued, just so we're clear, I have never had a business partner. I built my company entirely by myself with zero help from my family. My brother here has never invested in real estate and doesn't own any portion of my business. Kevin nodded. So when he took my $5,500, he committed fraud. Brandon finally found his voice. Look, I was going to pay him back. I just needed some time to get things sorted out. Here's what's going to happen, I told him firmly. You're going to give Kevin his money back immediately. You're going to take down all those fake business profiles. And you're going to pray that the police go easy on you when I file charges Tuesday morning. You wouldn't call the cops on your own brother, Brandon said, desperation creeping into his voice. Wrong thing to say, I replied, pulling out my phone. Actually, let's call them right now. Brandon panicked and started begging me not to involve the police, promising he'd make everything right, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. The same excuses he'd been using his whole life, but I was done enabling him. I called 911 right there in the coffee shop. I need to report a fraud in progress. The suspect is here with me now. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol officers showed up. I explained the situation and showed them the evidence. They arrested Brandon on the spot for fraud and identity theft. The last thing he said as they put him in the patrol car was, "Mom and Dad are going to hear about this." Good, I told him. Maybe they'll finally understand what kind of person they've been enabling all these years. Kevin got his $5,500 back eventually. It turned out Brandon still had most of it in his checking account. But the criminal charges stuck. My brother ended up pleading guilty to avoid jail time, but he got 2 years of probation and had to pay restitution to his other victims, because Kevin wasn't the only one. The investigation uncovered at least 6 other people Brandon had scammed for smaller amounts. The total damage was almost $42,000. When my parents found out about the arrest, they went absolutely nuclear. Not at Brandon for being a criminal, but at me for destroying the family. The irony was completely lost on them. 6 months later, Brandon and Crystal got divorced. She moved back to her home state and took his last name off her social media profiles. Last I heard, he was working at a call center and living in a studio apartment across town. The crazy thing is how much better my life got once I cut off all the toxic family drama. My business is thriving, Victoria's pregnancy is going smoothly, and we're actually excited about the future instead of constantly dealing with manufactured crises. Sometimes you have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your sanity. I chose sanity, and I've never been happier.